What is up, Transplants for Children, family, friends, and supporters? Travis is here with an awesome interview to talk to one of our TFC parents, Nicole, who's the mom of Walker, and they've been part of our TFC family for a little bit now, so we're gonna let her introduce herself and kind of hear her inspiring story and what their family does.
Hi everyone, happy Sunday. My name is Nicole and I have a 6-year-old bone marrow transplant child. His name is Walker, and we were introduced to Transplants for Children when Walker was about maybe a month and a half or 2 months old. So we've been part of the TFC family for over 6 years. So we've been clients for that long, and then as soon as he got better, I started being a parent volunteer with TFC, and I've also been serving on the board with Transplants for Children for the past about 3 years now.
Awesome. I had no idea he was that young when you guys found out. That's super crazy, and I think a lot of us have similar situations to that. So when you did find out at about a month and a half old that he was sick, how did you hear about that? Like, what was going on? What was kind of your journey to learning about him needing a transplant?
Yeah, so we knew from one of our newborn screening results that something was wrong with him when he was about 1 week old. So we knew super early on that there was something wrong. We didn't know what it was. The only thing that the pediatrician could tell from the newborn screening results was that it was something that had to do with his immune system. So from about 2 weeks old, a week and a half, 2 weeks old, when we got those results, she said, until we go for further testing, we figure out what this is, just go into lockdown. Nobody in and out of your house, just shut it down, stay quarantined until we figure out what this is. So after some trips to the hospital, seeing an immunologist, we, around the, I think, 3-week mark, we finally found out that his diagnosis is SCID, which is severe combined immunodeficiency. And I think most publicly and most commonly known as the bubble boy disease. I think a lot of people might remember that story from in the 70s a little bit more than, the term SCID. But in the most basic terms, it just means that Walker was born with no immune system whatsoever. So he didn't have a basic, basic starter immune system to kind of fight anything. So that's obviously why we had to stay quarantined and locked in until we could figure out what was going on. And then at, that 3.5 week mark, within, 2 days of getting the diagnosis, they checked us into Methodist Children's Hospital. And that's kind of when they told us, these are your options. So our options were, if we can find a bone marrow donor within, by the time he's 3 months old, ideally that his success rate would be about, I think, 95, 96%. And then it goes down tremendously if we can't find a donor within that first 3 or 4 months. I think at the 6-month mark, I think it goes down to about 43% survival rate, which is pretty drastic. So, it makes sense, if you don't find somebody in the first 3 months or even get diagnosed in those first, 2 to 3 months and try to start your path in finding a donor or treatment, most moms and parents at that point start taking their, their newborns around to go visit people. And, that's why the newborn screening was so important, to catch it so that we could, early diagnosis, early cure, for our disease and a lot of others. So,
well,
so yeah.
There's so much you went through such a drastic amount of change in such a short amount of time. That's just, it must have been super scary to go from thinking you have a healthy baby to not, and then not knowing what's wrong. I can only imagine how scary that is.
Yeah, that was I think one of the biggest parts was that, having an immune deficient disease, he looks fine on the outside. It's everything's on the inside that's wrong. So, you go through, especially as a mom, you go through a lot of different feelings of, I felt a lot of guilt in the beginning One, because I had no idea what this diagnosis that they were telling me. I didn't even know what it was. I didn't know what it meant, for treatment, for survival. When you're told that your kid's sick, your head starts spinning and reeling, and you kind of get into a weird fog, and you only hear some things that are being thrown at you. So, you're in a fog and you're in a daze, and, you're kind of numb and fearful, all of that, all at the same time. And then you kind of have to, I think I had a good cried it out. And then I just kind of had to pull myself up, toughen up, and say, okay, what's going on? What do we do? And then from that point over, you kind of start taking over mom mode, like, okay, what's the answers? What do we have to do? You just tell me what we need to do and we'll do it,
Yeah. And,
Going to fight mode.
I know, I think we can all resonate with the whole, that fogginess in a way. Sometimes we hear something about our health or our kids' health, and we go into this deep thought about what it is, and we miss everything else that was said because we just get so lost in it. But you did what all people in these kind of situations have to do, is you have to say, well, this is where we are now. We got to put the boots on and we got to fight it whatever way we can.
Yeah.
So were you shared about the timeline for the donor, were you able to find a donor within that first 3-month period, or how does that work with bone marrow? I know how organs work, and I don't know how bone marrow works all the time.
Yeah, no, it's, they start looking in the registry, Be the Match, and some other registries worldwide. And, it is very stressful, especially because we had already been educated through our transplant team that, they gave us a calendar and said, this is the date, ideally, that we need to, have everything in order to transplant by this date is the ideal date. And so when they give you that and you start, the days start going and nobody's coming and telling you that we have somebody, that gets kind of stressful. Mm-hmm. And then us, they came in, I think, I want to say like 6 or so times telling me they have a donor. And then a couple days later, we don't have a donor. We have a donor, and the thing is, legally, obviously they can't tell you why that particular donor didn't work out. But of course, as a mom who's looking at the days counting down, and you're just like, oh, what happened to that one? You know what I mean? You get so frustrated, but it's just part of the process. And you just, I did at one point, I think after being told yes and then no, like the 6th or 7th time, I asked them, please do not come in my room and tell me yes, that we have somebody, unless it is for sure a yes. You know what I mean? Like, please don't get my up, because it was just emotionally just too much. It was too much to deal with at that time. You know what I mean? And it's just like you get super excited, and then your heart breaks. And then, like I said, as the days kept counting down, because we did get to that point where we were getting really close to that day that we needed a transplant, up until that time where they need to work up all the bone marrow and stuff. So we were closing in on that date, and they came in and they started talking about the other options. And that's when your heart just breaks, because I had already seen the statistics at the time of the other options, which were, less. Let's just less. And from the education that you received initially. So when you're told, we used to be hopeful for 96%, and now let's drop that to 70%, because now we're having to look at, cord blood or different transplant options. It's rough, and so in that last week, when it came down to everybody scrounging and, they do what they do. I don't know, all the bookwork and matching and stuff like that. The first person that initially said yes to us, but then said no, of course, in the very beginning, some reason he came back around and something either worked with the schedule. And so that first person ended up coming back at the very end saying yes. And he ended up a 10-point match, unnamed, unidentified match, but he was a 10-point match for us. So that was the best that you can hope for, so
what a roller coaster ride. Just up and down. Yeah. And I know I personally know people that got multiple calls like that for hearts, for kidneys, whatever it is. And, you know, it's like you're on your last leg. Maybe they didn't have a time frame like you guys did to have a, you know, like a qualifying percentage, but it's still, you know, if your heart's giving out, your heart's giving out. And it still
Yeah.
feels like there's a buzzer to beat. And that's a terrifying thing to go through. So let's move to the happier side of things, right? So after his transplant, how quickly did things begin to change? How quickly did he improve? Like what was it like after the transplant?
You know, after the transplant, you know, they kind of send you home with some instructions, all the meds for us to administer and all the dressing changes and stuff like that. And you just kind of sit tight. You know, you go to outpatient, 3 or 4 days a week for infusions and stuff for as long as you need them. For us, and I know it's different, every single case you know, every person is different. Every patient is different for a bone marrow transplant, especially. But for us, it took a whole nother year, about a year and a half for his donor cells to kick in. So we just chilled and stayed at home for another year and a half, just at home, kind of like we are now during, you know, COVID. So we're kind of used to this.
So this is pretty familiar for you,
Yeah, this is very familiar. The sanitizing, the cleanliness. Yeah, it's the biggest difference is back then he was a newborn and wasn't going anywhere. He couldn't walk, but now he's a 6-year-old that wants to go everywhere. So that's a big difference. But
yeah, you could kind of just lay him in a place before. Now,
yeah,
I mean, a lot of us know Walker. We know how much he likes to run around and jump on things and all of that. So yeah, it's definitely probably different now. And so after that year, it was when his donor cells began to kick in. Does it become kind of normal at that point? Or I know nothing is normal for us, but does it feel more like normalcy?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is especially when being quarantined and being overly cautious because of having no immune system for so long, once the doctor says, okay, he's got some donor cell function, you can start going out into the world and, you know, doing things like go to the park, go to the grocery store, stuff that other people take for granted are like big deals.
Yeah.
But after living in that world for so long, you're super, super scared, you know, like a germaphobe. So it's a little bit of hesitation trying to introduce them, but then, you know, with a little push from, you know, our transplant team and our doctor, they're just like, you know, we won't know how he functions unless we let him get sick. You know, like you can't just keep him in during regular flu season. He's a normal kid. We have to treat him like a normal kid, let him go get sick and let's see how he responds. You know what I mean? It's just kind of how it is. Yeah.
Yeah, you feel like you're walking this like very careful little line to like, is it gonna work? Is it, you know?
Yeah.
And so I know this is kind of off of our little question here we had, but how do they track that like donor cell count? Are they looking for, you know, white blood cells? Are they looking for like what was like the sign that you could to go back into it?
Yeah, you know what? I've been so out of practice of going to, you know, outpatient and reading, you know, getting the printouts of all the numbers that I don't even remember. But yeah, it's all of the science stuff that made sense to me. You know, I would always just, I have absolutely zero medical background except for having a medically ill, fragile child, you know, so when you're in it and you're trying to be a parent of a child and trying to understand it, you know, I try to tell other parents, you're not going to understand it all. You know, I'd have to have a medical dictionary next to me. But what I could understand is if you tell me this number, you know, tell me what that number is supposed to be. And then I know in my head where we are, like, oh, shoot, we're like thousands away from that number. You know, we're close to this number. That kind of stuff makes sense to me as far as understanding. But I'd have to have it basically spelled out to me, and I'd write notes in my own words to understand what I needed to do, or if it was something I needed to do, or if it was just something that it's just something that we're watching for. You know, I really relied on my team to explain everything to me and keep me on track and keep me educated and keep me informed.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip just to sit on for a second, is like taking notes, keeping track of things.
Yeah.
If you talk to my mom about when I was a baby, when, you know, I was first after transplant for the first few years, probably for years and years after that, I have no idea, but she kept a very detailed journal of what time I took my meds, what time, you know, different things happened, if my breathing ever got out of whack, if like she kept very detailed notes so that when she went to the doctor there, she wasn't trying to remember what had happened or, you know, how things felt. She just had a detailed list. And that was what helped her get through each step, because most parents are, you know, that go through this don't have a medical background. You just get thrown into it, and then you learn a ton about a disease you didn't know existed until you had to.
Exactly.
So now, so you let him back into the world. He's running, you know, not running around. He's 1.5, 2. He's doing his thing. What, moving forward, you know, 3-4 years, how, you know, he's obviously doing okay. What does he do now? What is he up to now? He's in school?
I mean, you guys have seen him. Yeah, you guys have seen him. So he's a pretty active six-year-old running around. Has lots of friends. He's been able to go to school, which was always, you know, back in the day, you just didn't know, like, because he didn't get to socialize until he was kind of really about 3 years old. Start meeting other children his age, you know. For the longest time, the only kids that he ever got to kind of see or play with were the ones that we saw in outpatient at the Children's Cancer and Blood Center here, you know, in the medical center. So most of those kids were older. So I think that's one of the reasons why he's kind of used to being around older kids, is he wasn't really raised around little kids his age, because at that age, he wasn't really allowed to be around people. Mm-hmm. And so it was really just our medical families and friends that we got to play with. But, you know, he was able to enter school. We got the clearance to go to pre-K and then kindergarten. And, you know, this coming fall, in a couple, 2-3 weeks, he'll be going into first grade. Well, virtually going into first grade.
not going, but
going, yeah, virtually going.
Right,
yeah.
Right beginning.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I just want to ask, what does Walker want to be when he grows up?
Well, you know, for the longest time, it was he wanted to be an Army medic. So now it's Army medic / video game designer.
There you go. That sounds right up the alley of most kids these days.
Yeah.
Now I sound like an old person. These kids.
Yeah.
These days. Their video games. Yeah. And so I just have, you know, 2 more questions for you. Regarding just TFC and your involvement. Obviously you're on the board, you're a parent, you volunteer, you do the Family Connect meetings, like you're all about it. So what, you know, how have they, you know, you support us now in a lot of ways. So how did they support you as an organization through the beginning of this?
You know, Transplants for Children, they have a lot of support for families out there, you know, to use. For us personally, Walker's SCID diagnosis, it was so rare that there's not, you know, a local SCID group. You know, even to this day, I think might have known or met maybe 3 to 5 other families with the same diagnosis in this city. So there is no group. And so when we were in the hospital and needed just some kind of support, because, you know, when you live in a hospital for 5 to 6 months, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. You know, we were one of the few on the floor, or maybe one of the only ones on the floor, that we weren't allowed visitors at all. So that's, you know, another reason why our transplant team and the doctors and nurses really become family. We weren't even allowed our parents or anybody to visit us. So it was really just my husband and I, and that was it. But I think our social worker gave our names, since we were a quote unquote transplant, to Transplants for Children. And then they had a rep come and visit us when we first got to the hospital, and kind of gave us the rundown of what they do. And for us, you know, honestly, in the hospital time, things were so heavy. We didn't really, you know, call upon them because they couldn't really come visit us anyway at that time. But honestly, as soon as we got out, we kind of contacted them, and it was family support that we got from them. We did utilize some of their financial support to help with some of our meds and some of our medical bills and grocery, because at the time, I obviously couldn't work, so I had lost my job. So I was unemployed for two years, unexpectedly unemployed for 2 years. So we were able to ask TFC for help, and so they were able to help here and there, just get us, through the really rough financial times. But really more importantly, for me, what I've gotten the most out of it is meeting the other transplant families that have become part of our family, you know. Another reason why we give back so much and volunteer so much and we try to participate so much, because, you know, I want to raise Walker to give back and to know what it's like to be around other transplant kids and, you know, to learn how to help. Because, you know, it's, none of us have a lot of money. I'm pretty sure any of our transplant families have, you know, a ton of money, but we have time and we have the knowledge and we've lived it. So we have a lot to share. And I want him to know as a child, as he grows up, that, you know, even though he was so young, he was 3 months old when he had his bone marrow transplant, but he still goes to meetings and I still educate on him on what did happen to him. So he can be somebody that can help other kids as he grows up and give back.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm glad this company exists so we can do these things for people like your family and all the families that we work with. And just one final thing, is there anything extra that you want to share with parents, grandparents, friends, whoever about this journey? Or,
you know, a couple of things that, because I do volunteer and go up to the hospitals and talk to families if they ever just need somebody to talk to that is just somebody that's in the same boat or has been in the same boat. And a few things that I always tell parents is you're not going to ever know everything, you know, and just like what I mentioned before about not understanding everything, don't be scared to ask as many questions as many times as you need them to be answered by somebody until you understand it the way you need to understand it, you know. And you can't be scared to speak up for your kid. I mean, especially when you're with your child 24/7, you know, doing the meds and stuff like that, and you come across something that doesn't feel right, whether it's, you know, something that a nurse is saying or even a doctor or anybody is saying, you know your child better than anybody else. So don't be scared to speak up just because it might be somebody of authority or whatever. It never hurts to get a second opinion or just to say, hey, wait a second, you know, are you sure that that's supposed to be, you know, that med's supposed to be pushed at that particular rate? Like, can we double check his weight or double check with somebody else, you know, what rate of meds he's supposed to be getting or the amount of meds, you know, because I know things happen, accidents happen. And I think parents are the best advocates for their own children during this. And then I think the other biggest thing that I would highly suggest to families that are going through transplant is when they have time, especially if they're in the hospital for a while, is to see if they can get any counseling services. Counseling and when I mean that, I mean counseling for the whole family. Because I think what people forget, I know a lot of times it's mostly moms that are going and sitting by their transplant kiddo, you know, nothing against dads, but it's mostly moms that are probably there day in and day out. But the counseling is good for everybody. You know, moms and dads, they all go through this transplant experience and they take different things from it. The stresses are different on different people in the family. So, you know, siblings feel it too. Grandparents, if they're a part of the transplant journey, you know, and take care of the kiddo too. Everybody needs to have support, which is the best thing about transplants for children, is that they offer support, not just for the transplant child, but their entire family, entire extended family, meaning caregivers, grandmas, grandpas, you know, cousins, nieces, you know, whatever. So that's one of the best things about TFC, is that it involves everybody. It takes care of everybody.
I mean, both of those points are great. And I know that's going to help, you know, whoever's out there watching this still, you know, I think it's really going to impact just the way that they go through these transitions, because a lot of our families have already done it, but there's a lot of new people that come in, you know, every single month to our organization that are where you guys were 5-6 years ago. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope everyone has a happy Sunday, and we will see you guys next time.
Happy Sunday. Bye-bye.